Hi, my name is Jonathan McCollum. It's a pleasure for me to be here with you today. I'm a professor here at Brigham Young University. I am a specialist in the Middle East. I am a historian of the Ottoman Empire, and I focus on the later Ottoman Empire. So I'm considered a modern Middle Eastern historian. I'm not a family historian by trade or a genealogist. However, I have come to appreciate the difficulties of approaching family history in the Middle East, and am currently leading a few projects to develop family history resources for people from the Middle East. Now, it's a great pleasure for me to introduce to you the Middle East and some of its record types. And I hope that I can be a resource for you as you begin to discover the great history of your own ancestry. Now, I'm going to share my screen here, and I've provided a small PowerPoint to bring us along on this presentation. Now, if you look here on the screen, you will see a picture of Istanbul. This is a city that I've grown to love. It was the heart of a massive empire. And I'd like to talk a little bit about sort of empires and their impact on Middle Eastern history. If you look at your screen here, you will see a series of maps demonstrating these vast empires that covered the Middle East for multiple centuries. Now, empires have left their imprint on the Middle East, and you are going to have to deal with them if you want to discover your own family's heritage in this region. Now, why? Well, because empires are, by their very nature, diverse entities. They bring together multiple people. For over 6 centuries, much of the Middle East was ruled by the Ottoman Empire. And it was an empire that was infused with religious and ethnic diversity. It was an empire of dozens of different religions, cultures, and languages. And that is evident when you take a look precisely at the landscape of the Middle East. If you were to look here at the modern city of Beirut, you can notice just from the architecture this diversity. Here we have the Muhammad Al-Amin Mosque right next to the massive Maronite Cathedral of St. George, right? A Sunni mosque alongside a Maronite Christian cathedral. And that's really what we're sort of dealing with when we grapple with the Middle East. And certainly when you're trying to explore your family history, you have to keep that in mind. Who are your ancestors? And where can you locate them? In what sort of records? And most importantly, what will the language be that is most essential for discovering your ancestors? I've put up 2 records here, very diverse, but really from similar locales, both generated within the Ottoman Empire. This is an Armenian church record, and this is an Ottoman government record. This one composed in Armenian, and this one Western Armenian, I should say, and this one composed in Ottoman Turkish, a dead language. So in order to sort of engage with the records of the Middle East, you're going to have to recognize that this diversity can generate a diversity of languages, and it will be indispensable for you to think about who would be capturing, who would be writing about your ancestors. Now, let's move along. I've been speaking a little bit about the Ottoman Empire. And the Ottoman Empire is really essential for understanding the Middle East today. It's also essential for sort of grappling with where your ancestors can be found. The Ottoman records are really prolific, and they're matched by the size of this empire. Notice that the Ottoman Empire ruled the majority of the Middle East, but also the Balkan Peninsula and deep into North Africa. Now, there are some problems with approaching Ottoman records. Some of the difficulties are that the records can sometimes be dispersed. You're not always going to find them at the heart of the empire, which was the old city of Constantinople, now known as Istanbul. You'll find records that are still located in places diverse as Palestine or Algeria or Tunisia or Kuwait. And the number of records that were produced by this empire are also considerable. Many say that empires are run on paper, and that is certainly true of the Ottoman Empire. In the central archives of the Ottoman Empire, now located in Istanbul, this is the Başbakanlık Osmanlı Arşivi, or the Ottoman Archives of the Prime Minister's Office, has tens of millions of different records stored from the many centuries that the Ottoman Empire ruled the Middle East. Now, a final problem with Ottoman records is that the vast majority of them were written in Ottoman Turkish. And as you may know, Ottoman Turkish is a dead language. In fact, it's not just a dead language, it's a rather difficult language coming from, say, maybe a Western European language. The Ottomans themselves referred to their language as the El Sinei Selase, which meant the three languages, because it was really a mix of Turkish, Arabic, and Persian. And so many times when specialists begin to learn the Ottoman language, they're told to learn 2 or 3 languages. Start learning Turkish, start learning Arabic, start learning Persian. And that's precisely what I did to achieve training in Ottoman Turkish. Now, these records, while this empire is dead and this language is dead, however, the records hold a vast source of potential for family history. For one thing, these records captured the diversity of the Middle East. The Ottomans kept records on all of their subjects, whether they were Christian, Jewish, or Muslim. And when we think of the size of the empire, we know that at least 500 million people in the world today have ancestry that can be traced back into the Ottoman Empire. Now, the Ottoman Empire was also an entity that was trying to compete with Europe. And so the sort of detailed records that Western European family history experts are accustomed to, we see analogs to them produced in the Ottoman Empire. Here we see a couple of them here on this slide. This is essentially a census record that annotates an individual, both male and female. It indicates relationships, both brothers and sisters, nephews and nieces. It also indicates, parents. And it locates the individual both as to where they're living at the moment and where they were born. So it's a record with a whole lot of potential for family history research. Another one here is a personal identification record. These were issued in the late 19th century to all subjects of the Ottoman Empire. Again, these records contain the name of the individual, but also the names of that individual's parents, their birthplace, their birth year. And so these records that were produced in the millions for the population of the Ottoman Empire are very beneficial to people like myself that are now attempting to find and locate individuals 100, 200 years in the past. Now, the Ottoman Empire is not the only sort of source for records of genealogical significance in the Middle East. Islamic court registers are also a very important tool for not only obtaining information about your ancestors, but also they contain narratives about your family's history if you can locate them in these registers. Now, the Ottoman Empire, again, is very significant for these Islamic court registers. What we see in the centuries of the Ottoman Empire is a systematization of record keeping. So, as there had been Islamic courts really since just after the emergence of Islam, during the Ottoman centuries, so around the 15th and 16th century, we get a systematization throughout the Middle East and the Balkans of Islamic court record keeping. Unfortunately, this didn't expand out from the Ottoman Empire. And so we don't see a similar systematization for Sharia court or Islamic court records in other Muslim majority countries. And they do, to an extent, present a problem for us when we try to do our research, because after the breakup of the empire, we see the dispersion of these records. In some places, like Turkey, Syria, and Egypt, these records were centralized in archives. In others, they remained in the Islamic courts. And so you have to do a little bit of footwork to figure out where these records are still preserved. Some have been digitized, but unfortunately very few. Probably the best digitization effort is from the Turkish state itself, that has not only digitized many of its Sharia court records, but has also provided transliteration of these Islamic court records. Now, they are, however, sometimes difficult when we're trying to locate an individual, because you have to read through dozens or hundreds of court cases that may not relate to your individual ancestor. They're written in a narrative format, and so you can't always immediately identify the names of the individuals unless you go through many of them and locate who the individual is that is mentioned early on in the narrative. And it also requires, to a great extent, language training in the language in which they were produced. In the Arab world, that language would have been Arabic. In other parts of the Ottoman Empire, these court registers were kept in Ottoman Turkish. And so it requires sort of proficiency in language and also paleography to be able to sort of read the handwriting of the individual. Now, as I've said, we can find centralized repositories of these records in Turkey, Syria, and Egypt, but you might have to explore other options if your ancestors are from other countries. Now, another helpful resource are tribal lineages. Now, they're not universally significant for every individual from the Middle East. Tribal lineages are very important for certain groups of Arabs. This is me and my family when we were living in Qatar in the Persian Gulf. In the Persian Gulf, tribal lineages are very important. And most individuals can go back 4 or 5 generations just with their own name and tell their ancestors, their male ancestors. Now, in other regions that have been urbanized and have gone through state centralization, tribal lineages are less significant. One thing about tribal lineages is that there is a notion within them of sort of humanity's common ancestry. You'll hear Arabs refer to the Beni Adam, meaning human being, but literally it means the children of Adam. And even today, there are genealogical organizations that are attempting in the Arab world to link um, uh, individuals to their tribal ancestors and link all those tribes all the way back to Adam. Now, we can debate the scientific premise of this idea, but it does indicate this sort of idea of the common ancestry of all humans, which is, in my mind, a beautiful thing. Now, one thing to keep in mind with tribal lineages is that tribes rely upon patrilinear, or I should say, tribes in the Middle East rely upon patrilinear ancestry. This is maybe, you may be aware of this when you see people's names from the Middle East, when they have an ibn in their name, meaning son, or bint, meaning daughter. Because individuals, right, they trace their lineage through, right, being the son of a father who is in turn the son of another father. Okay? So this ibn will acts very much like, say, Mik in my own name, McCollum, right? It means, indicates son of. Now, tribal lineages are fortunately available in many publications in the Arab Middle East. Here, this one is about the tribe of Benitami, a very sort of famous and renowned tribe within Saudi Arabia. It is important to recognize, however, that most of these tribal lineages are, or I should say all of them, are subjective genealogies, that they are political in nature and therefore may not always indicate sort of the blood relations of all individuals contained within a tribe's lineage. Many times tribal leaders will tell the story that they want to. And over the last several decades, anthropologists have made us aware of how inclusive tribes often were. So individuals were often grafted into these tribes. Now, another significant repository for an individual's genealogy in the Middle East, if they are Christian, are church records, parish records. But it is important to recognize that there is a very diverse Christian population in the Middle East. So you have to identify, first of all, what church your ancestors belong to. Some of the most significant ones are the Armenian Church, the Orthodox Church, the Maronite Church, and the Coptic Church. All of these have produced records for their members that indicate baptisms, death records, funerals, those sorts of events, marriages as well. And so you can use these records as genealogists use sort of Western European records to locate your ancestors. It is important, again, to recognize the linguistic diversity of these records. Armenian church records will not surprisingly be written in Armenian. Orthodox church records may be written in Greek, or they may be written in Arabic, depending on the locale. Maronite church records are often written in Arabic, as the vast majority of Maronites lived in the region of Lebanon. And then, of course, there's the Coptic church records of Egypt that are often either in Arabic or in Coptic. Now, one region within the Middle East that requires special consideration is Iran. Iran is a different creature, and I've spoken a lot about sort of the sort of Middle East, the Arab Middle East, and Turkey. I haven't told you much about Iran. Iran, unfortunately, was, well, maybe not unfortunately, but for our purposes, unfortunately, was not part of the Ottoman world. And so the sort of record keeping that we see in the Ottoman Empire was not produced in the same measure within Iran. And it's really not until the Pahlavi era, so until post 1925 that Iran really begins to produce censuses at a large scale and tries to objectively surveil its population. And so we have a sort of a dearth or an absence of many records in Iran. And then, of course, there's the sort of difficulties of travel. If, say, you're an American citizen like me, it becomes very difficult to sort of travel in Iran without sort of a liaison or a sort of guide. Likewise, in Iran, there's the difficulty of these larger genealogical organizations that have appeared in recent years cannot do business in Iran because of the sanctions imposed on the country by the United States. Now, to wrap this up, I just like to tell you there are some challenges to affecting research on your ancestors in the Middle East. I'd say first and foremost, there's the problem of language. You are going to have to locate people that either speak and read the language that you require, or you're going to have to learn those languages yourself to be able to do your family history. The other issue that you'll find is that working with archives and repositories of these records of genealogical significance requires quite a deal of patience and persistence. Some archives welcome people in, like the Ottoman archives in Istanbul. Others, however, will make you go through quite a bit of red tape. Say the National Archives of Egypt are like that. So keep that in mind and be aware that it may take some time to find the records that, to even gain access to the records that you want to see. Now, finally, what I would like to tell you though is while there are some challenges, you can be hopeful because the locals, the people that you run into in the Middle East, they can provide help and guidance for you. They're some of the kindest individuals that I have run into have been in the Middle East. They have helped me on my quest to sort of my quest to explore the history of this region and to obtain access to archives that I wanted to see. And what I'd finally say is that don't be afraid of this region. I'm an American and I've lived 7 years of my life in the Middle East, and I've always found people to be willing to help and to guide me. And if you are really concerned about traveling within the Middle East, I urge you to look me up, talk to me individually, and I can give you some advice. And finally, I can be a resource for you as well. I have a sort of broad knowledge of the Middle East, and I have some very specific knowledge about various different archives. So I welcome you to reach out to me whenever you may need some help. And that's all that I have for you today in this presentation, and I hope you enjoyed it. And please feel free to comment or ask me questions. Okay, bye.